He gave me a little tour of the place. It's a really fascinating place.
Mike, your chair.
Shut your thing. Thank you very much. Shut this thing off. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, good evening, good evening. Please take the last seats in the house. This is a packed house, and for very good reason. You guys are in for a true treat tonight. I got a little preview of it yesterday, and no doubt you're going to have a big fun tonight. By the way, I'm Richard Garriott. I'm the current president of the Explorers Club, and first of all, welcome to all of you. I'm curious, how many people is their first time in the Explorers Club? Anybody? Are you all? Oh, so wow, quite a few actually. So 20% or so, 10 to 20% of the folks here for the first time. To you 20 especially, welcome. For those 20 of you who don't know the club well, I mean, this club was formed in 1904 during what I like to describe as the heroic age of exploration, where people were still pushing the last dragons metaphorically off the maps of the earth, when people were risking and way too commonly, I would argue, losing life, limb, or crewmates along the way on a lot of these early expeditions. Modern exploration is less about planting flags and more about bringing back good science for the good of humanity back here on Earth, but it's still commonly risky. I mean, we just this year we've lost a fair number of our explorers out on expeditions, as we do most years. But obviously we think the greater good of all this information coming back is still worthwhile. Space is one of the major frontiers. It's really opening up very quickly right now. In fact, our annual dinner coming up this April is going to be focused on space, and in particular how commercial space is opening up a lot of new opportunities and frontiers and activity opportunities in space. So hopefully some of you will get a chance. I know the club members, by the way, the tickets just went on sale today or tomorrow, by the way, for ECAD, for those of you who haven't known. But in any case, for those of you new, welcome. Hope you come back to many more of these and get a chance to explore the club itself, its history, and spend some more time with us here at the Explorers Club. I know you know well why you're all here to see Mike and Bud. For those of you who don't know, we have a lot of very experienced explorers that hang out here at this club. In fact, we have a lot of astronauts that hang out in this club. I myself am an astronaut that hangs out in this club. So astronauts are sort of a dime a dozen around this place. But in all sincerity, there are astronauts, and then there's Mike. And Mike is really in a class by himself. He is really the astronaut's astronaut. He is one of the best communicators of the space program, one of the best communicators about what it's like to live and work in space. I've had a chance just overnight to get it, and hearing some stories yesterday about the book to have a peek at it. I know you're going to get a chance to really enjoy that. Bud, by the way, has been a journalist for 40 years or so, something like that.
Impossible.
I was 3 when I started.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Here you had a good tenure at New York One, in fact, too. I was at
New York One for 25 years.
25 years.
It was a great expedition.
Yeah. And so you guys are in good hands. I mean, these are both super experienced, super high-level people to present to you not only the contents of this book, but the character of one of my favorite astronauts, Mike Massimino. So the floor is yours, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. When you're a journalist, and if you go out on a story and you learn something, that is a great day on the job. And each time that I've interviewed Mike, I have learned something. And that's really a wonderful thing. Congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
Moonshot, a NASA Astronaut's Guide to Achieving the Impossible. Let's get started. In the early part of the book, I'm reading, and I am thinking, and one of the themes I am thinking of two of my favorite things, the Beatles and the 1969-70 New York Knicks. Now, hold on a second here. Stay with me for a moment. People would say to me, oh, who's your favorite Beatle? And I would say, the Beatles are my favorite Beatle. 4 of them together. Not one guy, 4 of them. Who's your favorite Knick? The Knicks are my favorite Knicks. That's who it is. It's about a team. And you write really eloquently about this notion of what we might think of something being done in solitude, right? Preparation and then being up there, but solitude. There's thousands of people that you're representing and thousands of people who are part of the team. Is there a first time when that really clicks in for you after you've become an astronaut that, oh wait, this is really something where there are so many people involved in this process?
Yes, certainly. First, let me thank the club for having us here. I'll forget the question, so I'm going to come back to it in a second.
I'll come back to it.
But thank you all very much for coming. I really appreciate it. This is a busy time of year, and thank you very much for coming here. Richard, thank you for the introduction, and everyone at the club for hosting us here. Maybe we should wait till after the talk, but in case the talk doesn't go well, my agent is here. Bird and Dan, my two agents here over here somewhere. The editor for the book, if you want to be mad at someone about the book, Dan is here somewhere in the back, and there he is, and Kara is back okay. I think that's it from the publisher. I think my sister Fran is here helping out with outside, I think. But anyway, I think that's it. I probably, Dad wanted to at least get those thank yous in. And now we want to talk about the book, yeah, or about learning about teamwork.
And the notion of team.
Yeah, so the notion of team. So I always liked, in fact, one of the things that I really wanted to be a part of at NASA when I decided I wanted to pursue this, and it was later in life. I saw Neil Armstrong on the moon, made me want to grow up to be an astronaut, and then I kind of realized that wasn't going to happen. But I was, this kind of skinny kid, and kind of, I didn't like heights. I found out when I was 8, and I still don't like heights. And it's problematic for an astronaut to be afraid of heights. And I've been thinking about this. People are like, how could you be an astronaut and be afraid of heights? I asked my wife last night, even after, I go, you think I'm really afraid? And she goes, absolutely 100%. It's true. I mean, because she reminded me we were walking across the Hoover Dam Bridge, and I didn't want to do it at all. I was like, kind of went onto the side of it. You ever been on that thing? It's kind of high off the ground. And
for the exact same reason.
I really don't like heights. It's just no reason. I just don't like them. No reason to mess with those things, right. No good. So I just didn't see myself growing up to be as fearless test pilot like Neil Armstrong, who was my hero. But I saw this movie when I was a senior in college called The Right Stuff. It's based on the book of the same name by Tom Wolfe, and that kind of reminded me of my passion. I never lost interest. I just didn't ever think I could be a part of it. And it took me a little while to come to that realization that I would never truly be happy unless I gave it a shot. So I decided I was going to try to pursue this thing. And what really attracted me about The Right Stuff, it was two things. One was looking out the window and being in space, the whole thing about exploring space, but it was also being part of that team. They showed the camaraderie between the astronauts. And I wanted to be a part of a team like that, where you always have each other's backs. You're doing something that's really important in service to something that's bigger than you. And I wanted that. That's what I wanted more than anything. I think even more, and I look back on my time at NASA and what I do miss my time in space. It was glorious, but I really miss the camaraderie of working problems on the ground. And my introduction to that was, I think you're referring to chapter 2, okay. which is I think the title of it is, no one leaves the pool until everyone passes the test. Right. So I had tried twice. I applied to the astronaut office when I was in grad school, and I got a letter in the mail. I was rejected. I got that letter about 9 months after. And then a couple years went by. I was just about done with grad school, and I applied a second time, and I got a different letter. They changed the date at the top of the letter. It was the same letter I got all those years earlier. And then, so I was like, all right, I got through school. I was working down at the Johnson Space Center, and NASA's looking for astronauts a third time, and I sent in application number 3. And then this time, I don't get a letter, I get a phone call. They want me to come in for an interview. And the interview is, it's a whole week of activity, a lot of medical exams. I ended up failing the eye test. And so that was pretty disheartening. But I figured out a way to get around that, or I thought anyway. It did work. I went through some vision training to get around that, was able to improve my vision a little bit, and just to requalify. And I applied a 4th time, and then I got in on the 4th try. But once and I was ecstatic. I finally got in after about 10 years of really trying to get in. And I get this letter in the mail. I get a package of information in the mail. First, I got a phone call. They call you up. Dave Leitsma from the Johnson Space Center, head of flight crew operations, and I knew the call was coming, so I stayed at home. I didn't want to cry at the office. I wanted to be home. So in case it was bad news. But that phone call came, and I answered it, and he goes, Mike, this is Dave Leeson from the Johnson Space Center. How you doing today? And I said, Dave, I really don't know. You're going to have to tell me how I'm doing today. And he said, I think you're going to be doing a lot better now because we want you to become an astronaut, and we're wondering if you're still interested. Can you imagine this? And the only word that was going to come out of my mouth was yes after that. Just yes, yes, yes. And then about a few days later, this packet comes in the mail. This packet of information, like when you're going to get a new job. I don't know if they do that anymore. It probably goes through email or electronic stuff. But this, was actual paper that came in the mail. And I opened up this packet very excitedly. And the first paragraph was, welcome to NASA, congratulations. And then the second thing was, please practice your swimming, right? And because you're going to have to pass a swim test in order to go through water survival school with the Navy in Pensacola. And we need to do that in order to fly an ejection seat aircraft. So if you bail out, if you eject over the ocean, you're going to have to survive in the water until they come find you. The shuttle, which the spaceship at the time, had a bailout abort capability. So you might end up bailing out over the ocean, and then they have to come get you. You have to be able to survive in the water. Before you can go through any of this class with the Navy, lasts about a week and a half or so, you got to pass a swim test. And apparently, people were showing up at NASA, a lot of civilians. I think the military people were already ready to go in this. But I was one of the civilians, and I guess in the past, people had shown up, and the Navy would send them back. So they're going to drown, teach them how to swim first. So they didn't want that to happen. They asked us to pass this. We had to get ready to pass a swim test. So.
One guy grew up on Long Island who wasn't crazy about the water.
No, I didn't like the water because it was kind of cold. And I was very skinny, as I said. So I was just shivering all the time when I was in the water.
Between the cold water and the heights, I'm with you, my friend.
I didn't like. Now, and we also have bridges here. As long as you don't look over the edge to get afraid of the heights. We have bridges. There's no reason to go in the water. You look down the East River, you see bridges. And then there's tunnels you can't even see. You can use those as well. No reason to go and swim for it when you need to go to Brooklyn.
Two questions. One, which is a serious question, but the first question is more of a wise guy in New York question. And that is, I had heard years ago that Columbia, an institution you attended, had a swim test.
They did. Yeah. I don't think it's... Did William have to pass that? I think if you're in Columbia College, you still have to pass that. But the engineering school, I think it's like only if you want to. They might have lost a few too many freshmen in the pool. But we did have that requirement. That was just one lap. But I remember very distinctly the gym teacher at Columbia saying over that first, it was like our first day of school, freshman orientation, and we're sitting there, and all of us in our swim trunks or whatever, and he's like, he goes, you just have to get across one lap. He goes, you can do any stroke you want. You can go to the bottom of the pool and crawl, but you will not graduate from this university unless you can do one lap of the pool. So that worked.
And that inspirational moment, you can go to the bottom of a pool and crawl.
Yeah, I somehow did something. They didn't really care, though. I mean, they weren't really looking, and you could use the rope and hang on to your friend. They really didn't care. I think maybe back in the day it was more of an issue for some reason. But now I think it's an optional thing for the engineers. But the teamwork aspect of it comes into where I was not feeling good about this swim test. I was not a strong swimmer, and I avoided the water whenever I could. And now I was going to have to do these things, which included probably nothing. If you were a good swimmer, it probably wasn't that big. It was a bunch of laps that was timed, but you had to wear your full boots and flight suit and helmet, and so you had to do that. It was a rescue swim. Part of it too, you had to rescue your buddy and drag him for around a couple hundred yards or something, and then you had to demonstrate these certain strokes that were good for survival strokes. And then there was a drown proofing where you had to do the float, we used to call it the dead man's float, but it was like this kind of really hyperextended thing. You had to do it for a while and just take sips of air while you were in the water. And then it was the last thing was this tread that they had us do. That was a fairly long tread, but it was broken up into parts. One, you could just do whatever you wanted to stay above water, and then the second part, you couldn't use your hands. You just got to use your legs. And then the very end, you had to keep your hands out of the water, like above your head. And so for me, this was very challenging to do all this stuff.
I think what I'm hearing is that it was slightly more difficult than the Columbia University
It was a lot,
test.
Yeah, and it was going to be these Navy guys looking at you, with cigars and stuff. But they're going yelling. So you had not too bad. They couldn't really yell at us too much. But you had they were not going to let you participate in the course unless you could pass that test in front of their eyes. So NASA wanted to make sure they didn't send anybody that couldn't pass the swim test.
And so what happens that weekend?
So my first week of work at NASA was a lot of really cool introductory stuff going on. We got sworn in as civil servants, and we had some people come. Neil Armstrong came and visited, which was my big hero there. Since I was 6 years old, I got to meet him that first week, but it was mainly administrative stuff. Like this is how this, some basic briefings. At the end of the week, on that Friday afternoon, we're all in a classroom. There's 35 Americans and 9 international astronauts, 8 different countries represented. And Jeff Ashby, a Navy pilot, comes into the classroom before we're ready to go home for the weekend. And he says, all right, first week's over. He was an astronaut from the previous class, so he was chosen to kind of lead us through this training. So he comes in, Bud, and he tells us, all right, first week's over, but I want to remind everyone that your training will start in earnest, like no more kidding around, on Monday. And we're going to begin with the first thing you're going to need to accomplish, the swim test. And I was thinking to myself, of all things, why can we have a math quiz? Something that maybe would be a little more doable. But then he goes on to say, who are the strong swimmers in this group? And a couple people raise their hand. And then he goes, more important, who are the weak swimmers? And don't lie to me. And I raised my hand, as did my friend Charlie Camata, who's from Ozone Park, Queens. I don't know if there was any similarity there. The 2 New York guys didn't know how to swim. So we both raised our hands, and others did as well. And he goes, okay, everyone else can go home, but the strong swimmers and the weak swimmers are going to stay after class. And you're going to arrange a time to meet at a pool over the weekend. And the strong swimmers are going to help the weak swimmers with their swimming, because when we go to that pool on Monday, no one leaves the pool till everyone passes that test. And so that showed me, your question, which was I think about a half hour ago, was about teamwork. And that was my introduction to teamwork right there, that if you were good at something, what you needed to do is make sure that all of your teammates were okay with it, could pass as well. So you could be Michael Phelps and break a world record, but if you left someone behind, you failed. And on the other end, which was really an important lesson, I think, and that was like my first glimpse of it, is the way we operated is that if you needed help, you needed to ask for it. You needed to raise your hand and ask for it. And if you did not, that was a problem, because then you're holding back the rest of the group. So if you were out on a field exercise and you got hurt, and you didn't want to admit it, you needed to admit it, because your buddies needed to know that, hey, you twisted your ankle, whatever it is, we're going to help you out. Or because that's going to hurt the team if you don't admit it. Or if you're having trouble with a concept or in your training or whatever it is, you needed to speak up. There was no shame in that. There's going to be plenty of times for you to make up for it when you could help others. So when you could give help, give it. But when you needed help, you needed to speak up.
You've written about it in your previous book, which is also a terrific book, and you allude to it in this one also, that it was the 4th try, which is not. It's more unusual to get in on the first try, correct?
It is. It's yeah. So I think there's part of that too, is that perseverance is important. And I don't know if they were like automatically, would automatically, it's first try. But I do think there was the idea, because once you get selected, then you become part of the selection team. It's in some level. And they want to make sure that this is something that you really want to do.
Right.
But they do pick people on the first try, but they didn't pick me on the first try.
The perseverance, where do you think that comes from?
I think I think it came from me wanting to be successful, but also understanding that I probably wasn't going to be, in some odd way. That I knew that what I was trying to do was really difficult. The first chapter is 1 in a million is not 0, which is what I came to the realization was that my odds of becoming an astronaut, I thought, were maybe 1 in a million, with everything working out the way it would have to work out. And this was after my second rejection, and the thought went through my mind. I was up at MIT, so it was this math kind of place, and I knew that 1 out of a million was not a 0 outcome. It was a really small number. And that you can control your effort, but you can't. I couldn't force them to pick me as an astronaut. And if I tried to force them, that would have backfired for sure. Like, you got to pick me. That's not going to work. So I knew that I could not force them to do that. I could try to make the decision hard for NASA, try to become the best candidate that I could be, and try to improve on each time I applied. But I knew that most likely I was never going to get picked. But I felt like, not that that was great, but that was something I could live with. What I could not live with, Bud, was the thought of giving up. I don't think I've ever would have forgiven myself if I didn't keep trying. That was unthinkable, because you only have one shot at this, at life and at something like that. And once you give up, once you stop, they're not going to come knocking on your door. Then the probability is zero. You know what the outcome's going to be. And when I was, after my third rejection and I got the eyesight thing overturned so I could try again, I got another interview and I was waiting to hear. I interviewed in October and I was going to get the word. I ended up getting the word in April. You never know when they're going to actually tell you, but it came in April. But that March, I remember, was spring break and I was teaching at Georgia Tech, and I went on a spring break trip with my family. My kids were little, and we went to the beach, and I remember thinking that if I got told no again, and I was kind of figuring that was going to happen, right? I thought everything went well, got by the medical, but I still was probably going to be told no again just because of the way it is. And if I was going to keep trying, no doubt in my mind, I was going to keep trying. I would be and continue to try to this day. But at least I ended up I landed in a good place. I was I was in a tenure track position as a professor at Georgia Tech. I had already flown an experiment in space, and I was hoping for more. I was living in Atlanta. I had gotten my PhD as a result of this, because I felt like this was something that to me, the PhD was important because I wanted to learn. I wanted to get that degree, but also, to me, it was also important for the astronaut program, so it gave me that extra little incentive, I think. I had gotten a private pilot's license. I had learned to scuba dive, even though I didn't like the water. I'm okay when I have equipment with me, So I had all these other things, and I'm realizing that if I never tried, if I didn't have that motivation to try to become an astronaut, I wouldn't have. I don't know if I would have accomplished these other things and been in the spot I was. So I think the trying is what's important, and we can control that. We can control whether we give up or not. They can keep telling us no, but we can keep trying. And I just kept that in my mind. 1 out of a million is not zero. Just keep trying, and maybe it'll work out. And luckily it did.
As an interviewer, you prepare and prepare and prepare, and there's no excuse for lack of preparation. But then you have to allow yourself to be surprised by something that somehow you didn't read previously, so that you're in the conversation and you learn something which is really cool. And I noticed that one of the chapters is about the ability, that's my word, to be surprised in space. How does that come about?
Yeah. That's the Be Amazed chapter, I think, yeah. So that was, I think that that just came about from my observations in space. And I was, we're trained very well to do our jobs. I didn't really believe that. There's some of that in there too. Sometimes I felt like I was being asked to do something and assigned to do it, and I trained for it, and you never really know if you're ready, but we're ready. I think we have to learn to trust our training and our team and ourselves, and we were really well trained. But what you never really train for is what the experience is going to be like. So we were trained well to do our spacewalks and the rendezvous and all that, but the view around us, especially during the spacewalks, looking through the window of the spacecraft seemed almost halfway normal, because you're kind of in the spacecraft and then you launch. So if this was like a spaceship and we launched into space and we started floating around, we're still kind of in the same place. You look through the window, it's beautiful over at the Earth and everything. But going outside, to me, it was like, the difference between looking at the fish in an aquarium and looking through the window, look at the beautiful fish, but you're wearing regular clothes and you're kind of admiring through the glass. But then if you go and scuba dive, now you're interacting with that environment. Like, oh, like we're here with the fish and wherever. You're in that environment. And that's what I felt like when I went out to spacewalk. I was in that environment, and now there's no window to look through. You can look anywhere you want. And I felt like a real spaceman at that time. And you can see the stars, and you can see the sun in a black sky, which is really cool, and look back and see the planet. And it's just magnificent. My first spacewalk, it was my first one. I was a little more nervous. Plus, it was a bit challenging. There was a lot of stuff going on that I really had to pay attention. And it wasn't until my second spacewalk where I had more of a chance to look around. And it was about midway through, and things were going really well. We had changed out an instrument called the Advanced Camera for Surveys, and we were now going to take the old one and pack it to put it back in this box that we took the new instrument out, about the size of a refrigerator. And I was in a foot restraint waiting for my buddy. He was on the robot arm. He had to go fetch this thing. Jim Newman had to go get it. So I knew I had about 5 minutes before he was going to come back, right? And I'm looking in the window of the cabin, and I can see my crewmates kind of giving me thumbs up. Everything's going well. And then I was like, this is my chance just to lose myself in what's going on. And I was off to my right side was the planet. You know, Earth is off to the right. And it was a day pass, so it was brightly lit by the sun. And it was so beautiful. There's no words to describe the beauty, so I'll just tell you what I was feeling. It was so beautiful, I felt like I couldn't even look at it. It was that beautiful. And the thought went through my head was, this is too beautiful for human eyes to see. You're not supposed to be seeing this. This is like a secret. And I actually turned my head away, like, don't look at it. It's too beautiful. And then I realized, you idiot, of course you're supposed to look at it. I mean, you know, when else are you coming back? You know, who knows when? So I looked a second time, and I just lost myself in the beauty of the planet, and I started to get a bit emotional. I kind of forgot where I was and what I was doing. And I started to tear up a little bit. I could start feeling it, you know, the tears starting to build in my eyes, and I became horrified. Someone has a guitar here from Chris Hadfield, or Chris Hadfield sold them. There you go. So Chris Hadfield was an astronaut on a previous mission, a Canadian guy, and he had a water bag problem. We had a drink bag, and it was like a bite valve on it, like a Camelback, and he replaced that with a new valve, and it was with the different pressures, it was having trouble, and it was burping out little bubbles that would float around, you know, like in front of him, and then mixed with the anti-fog. We put this like soapy substance on the visor so it wouldn't fog up on us. So it was doing it. I know Chris was just looking at it. So these water droplets kind of mixed with the visor, and then found its way back right to his eye. He can't do anything, you know, and it got in his eye. He had soapy water in his eyes, and he was like blinded. It was a big problem. Yeah. And now I'm about to cry in space, introducing my own water into my helmet. And if this is a problem, there's going to be an investigation. I'm going to have to admit that I was crying during my spacewalk. So I didn't want that. So I got myself under control, and I looked back a third time, and the thought that went through my head is, this is a view from heaven. You know, this is such a beautiful view. It's a heavenly view, whatever that means. You know, that's what, you know, we're up and away looking at the planet. And then I dwelled on it for about a moment, Bud, and I thought, no, it's more beautiful than that. This is what heaven must look like. And I felt like I was looking into absolute paradise. I could not imagine any place being more beautiful than our planet. And so that was pretty cool, right, to do that in space. And then you come back to Earth, and like, oh man, I'm not going to be able to see that view anymore, which is true, but you still see the Earth. And you actually, instead of looking at it from afar and admiring it, we get to be in it all the time for as long as we can, right? And the beauty now that I try to appreciate every day is I remember that scene, and I try to share that in the book. So even if you haven't been there, hopefully you can have that feeling when we're just doing, like, look at this place we're in. This is pretty amazing. You and I have known each other a long time. We're sitting here in this beautiful place with all of these friends here. This is a wondrous place we live in, our planet. You know, you can see it over the Grand Canyon. If you're flying across the country, that's beautiful. But even walking around the streets in New York or through Central Park, or people on the subway, the faces that are around you, I think we're living in an absolute paradise. And that's what I saw in space, but I get to engage it every day here on Earth.
We're going to take some questions in a couple of minutes, so you have plenty of time to ask some questions. Once your astronaut career had ended, did you have some notion early on that I have a bit of a facility for want of a better term, being a translator, and making this sing, to use an old journalism term, making this sing for people who are not only not astronauts, but not even maybe focused on science?
Yeah, I found that, you know, I was kind of I guess, good at some things as an astronaut. I was kind of mediocre, you know, as an astronaut, which is okay because there's a really good group of people. I was above average spacewalker. I was pretty good at the robot arm, but there was a lot, you know, there was a lot of stuff going on. But I felt the thing that I was maybe had a leg up on was communicating the story of space. I really enjoyed speaking about it, and NASA would give me all these opportunities to do that. I got to go on the Big Bang Theory TV show, if you've seen that, right? And I got, they just had me go speak with the writers, and then the writers asked me to come on the show, and that was pretty cool. And I got to go on David Letterman's show, and I think you interviewed me back then a couple of times. So NASA would, yeah, send Mike to do it, and I kind of like doing it. One of the things I talk about in the book was I also got asked to send the first tweet from space.
There you go.
Yeah, take that, Neil Armstrong. So there you go. Which now I think is kind of dubious, but it's like back then it was kind of cool, but now it's like, oh my God, Twitter, what the heck? But
I don't believe you had any control over what it became.
Yeah, you're right. Okay, but back then I didn't even know what Twitter was. I mean, I knew what it was, but this is like in April, right before we launched, April of '09, and I remember President Obama had used Twitter during the inauguration in '09, and so I kind of learned a little bit about it.
Hope you got some credibility at home.
I got credibility at home. What happened was that the tweet I sent really wasn't, looking back on it, wasn't very good, and it really wasn't my fault though. When I met Neil Armstrong, I think I'm saying it's not my fault, but when I met, you can judge. When I met Neil Armstrong, he still is my greatest hero. I mean, my dad and other people were very influential, but as far as like someone I idolized. And as I got to know him over the years, the more I learned, the more I idolized him. The way he gave credit to everyone else, he was such a kind, subdued, doing his job. And I hadn't met him until I became an astronaut. And that first week when he came to speak to our class, he spoke to the whole astronaut class. And the next day, I end up like on the food line next to him, right? And I'm saying to myself, do I say something to this man? And absolutely yes. So I introduced myself to him, and he's very nice. And I said, I've got something to ask you, Neil. And he goes, what's that, Mike? And I said, that thing you said on the moon. Everyone remembers what he said on the moon, right? One small step for, or maybe you're too young to know it, but you've heard it, right? To have heard it live. One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. So I said, that thing you said on the moon, that was amazing. I was a little kid watching it. I couldn't believe he came up with that. Everyone, the whole world is listening. I said, did you hire a publicist? Did you get a ghostwriter? Did your wife tell you to say that? How'd you come up with this? And he said, he looks at me and he goes, Mike, I didn't think about what I was going to say on the moon until after I landed on the moon. And I was like, really? And then he went on to say, Mike, if I didn't land on the moon, there'd be no reason to say anything, right? So I was like, okay. And then he got very serious with me. He looks at me and says, Mike, this is a serious business. You're new to this. And he knew I was a civilian, right? And no military background, none of that. And he's like, this is really serious. You're in the test flight business now, Mike, and bad things can happen if you lose your focus. You can't be distracted, and all that stuff is a distraction. All the publicity, all that stuff, you can't pay attention to any of that stuff. Stick to your job. And he's like, you got it? And like Neil Armstrong, greatest hero ever, I got it. So NASA asked me to send this tweet. Our last press conference, I get asked by the press, what are you have you thought about what you're gonna tweet? And I just, Neil Armstrong, I just channeled him, and I said, I'm not thinking about that now. If we've got to make it to orbit first. If we don't make it to orbit, there'd be no reason for me to tweet anything, right? We've got to take care of business first. And that was it. And that's what I did. And I got to space, and I opened up the computer, and I'm floating there, looking at it, and I realized that advice I got from Neil Armstrong was the worst advice I've ever got in my life. I couldn't think of a thing, bud. I could not. And then, after like a moment, I started to doubt what he told me. Like, there's no way that this guy was on the moon and thought of what he said. I mean, it was amazing what this guy said on the moon. And it's like, he lied to me. There's no way.
Total publicist. He definitely had a publicist.
Well, the only thing what I thought of Twitter, I almost sent, the first tweet was almost, curse you, Neil Armstrong. That's what I want. But I probably would have got chewed out for that, so that wasn't going to work.
Yeah, that's...
So what I wrote was, launch was awesome, the adventure of a lifetime has begun, something like that, and I shipped that down as the first tweet from space. That was on a Monday, or launch day. On Saturday, I get made fun of on Saturday Night Live. During Weekend Update with Seth Meyers, he says, we have the first tweet from space, and here it is, launch was awesome. In 40 years, we've gone from one giant leap for mankind to launch was awesome. if we ever encounter life in the universe, I assume this is how we'll be notified. And it shows my little Twitter thing on the TV, and it says, "Geez, dudes, aliens," right? So that was, I didn't know this was going on. We had more spacewalks to do. The next day I was outside on Sunday. The next we had another spacewalk on Monday, and then we were done with the spacewalks, bud. So I'm like, let's see what's going on down on the planet. So I float over to the computer, and this email from my kids, right? So like, oh, they probably want to congratulate us for a job well done. So I get on, and I'd been back at school, right? So I see, Dad, they made fun of you on Saturday Night Live. All the kids at school loved it. Keep up the good work. So that was a thing. That was a thing that got me some street cred with the local middle school. But just to follow up on that, I know we want to get to questions, but this thing about did he lie to me? I was watching on the 50th anniversary of Apollo in 2019. I was watching one of the specials, like a CNN or Nat Geo thing on, and they're interviewing Neil Armstrong's brother, and his brother says, I was playing Monopoly with Neil, a week before the launch, and he slips me a piece of paper during our Monopoly game, and I open it up, and it says, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." And he says, "What do you think?" And I said, "Neil, I think that's pretty good." And I hand him back the piece of paper. I'm like, I can't believe this. So Rick and Mark, who are friends of the Explorers Club, they who's here? Anybody here from the Explorers? They all leave already. They couldn't take it anymore. But no, I think they have their flag somewhere that, like Apollo, I think it was an Apollo 11 flag, and they're very good friends of the Explorers Club, both of those guys. And I saw them like a week later at an event, and I go, look, and I've become friends with them. I was like, hey guys, let me ask you this. I heard your uncle saying this about this thing. Your dad told me that he didn't think of it till he got on the moon. What's his story? And they go, oh, it's like Uncle Bill? And I go, yeah, that's who it was. He goes, oh, you can't pay attention to that guy. He was always saying all this stuff about that. And then I think it was Mark looks at me and says, Mike, if that's what my dad told you, that was the truth. And that's absolutely the truth. He had a poet in him that once the job was done of landing, he turned his attention to what he was going to tell the world. So that's it. Anyway.
What a story. All right, a microphone, I believe, will be coming around, Phil Donahue style, to make an old reference. So if anyone has a question, please raise your hands, because I got about 1,000 more questions. Yes, go ahead. Right up front here. Hold on, wait for the microphone, please.
Oh, thank you. Mike, you told a story one time about the Hubble telescope.
Yes.
Where someone was the last one to touch it, but they weren't.
Oh, yeah.
Could you tell that?
Sure. So we got the camera rolling on this one? All right, you can edit if you need to, right? If you no, what happened was yeah. So so there was this story of who was going to be the last person to touch the telescope, and there's a lot to this story. But what happened is that one of our guys was going to be the last one to touch the telescope, and they talked about it and prepared what he was going to say and so on, and then. After that was done, and someone is filming me with a phone here, so I don't know if I can tell all the story. But no, so what happened was one of the guys who was out there gets to after this was done, we were finishing up, and he calls my name. He's like, "Hey, Mass," and I can see him out in the payload bay, and I'm looking right at him, and he's like, "Can you see me?" I'm like, he's like playing charades with me. He doesn't want to say anything. Like, I'm like, what? I'm through the window. I'm playing charades with this guy, and he's on a handrail. He just pops up and touches the telescope and scampers away. So he's like popping in, he like runs away. So I thought this was like the funniest thing I'd ever seen, right? But then the bad part about that is right after that we had a problem. We ended up having we unfortunately came into contact with one of the antennas on the Hubble. And a piece of it went flying, and that caused some other stuff. So I don't know how to take that. It was really funny, but it was when that happened with my buddy was kind of kidding around, like I'm going to be the last guy, not the other guy. But it ended up right after that. We ended up I think we kind of gave ourselves some bad luck for messing around, because right after that we had to fix this problem with the antenna, which we did, and the original guy who was supposed to be the last guy to touch the telescope did. So I don't know if it's kind of like a bad luck thing. We were messing around too much, but yeah, that's what happened.
Karma exists in space.
Bird wants to know something. That's my agent back there.
What's it like to see the images that we're seeing now from Webb? Like, how do you respond when you? I mean, did you see anything like that before?
Well, sort of. Like the first release, some of the stuff they've released with Webb is exactly the early release images that they took with Hubble. And they really didn't, you have to kind of look for it. They didn't really publicize it that way. But if you do a side-by-side comparison, you can, I mean, it's easy to see the difference. The power of the Webb, you see so much detail in the images. So when you look at them side by side, the Webb is magnificent. Hubble is still working. We don't warranty any of the labor or anything, but it's still working and still making great discoveries. But it just does not have the power that the Webb does, particularly in the infrared area of the spectrum. So Hubble's pretty good throughout the spectrum of being able to see stuff. But the first light of the universe, which they're trying to get to, so they believe the estimates are that the universe is like 13.8 billion years old, right? And Hubble's able to get to around 13 billion, so they need that extra 0.8 from Webb is what they're looking for, the very first light. And that's very dim light that Hubble can't detect because it's so long ago. So Webb is very powerful in that infrared area to be able to detect that light. And also, analyzing the atmospheres of far-off planets looking for an Earth-like planet, Webb is much more powerful in that area. So I think it's amazing. What I think is probably going to be most interesting is the questions we don't know. We're trying to find answers like the age of the universe, what it looks like, and planet. But what Webb is going to show us that they're not going to be able to explain. And that's what happened with Hubble. In fact, the instrument that I mentioned earlier that we put in when I took my little break, the Advanced Camera for Surveys, that was used to validate a theory of dark energy. So when there were some of these astronomers looking at the expansion rate of the universe. So some things with Hubble, they knew that they were gonna look for and hopefully find. Like they thought there were black holes. Theoretically, Hubble found them. They thought there were planets in other solar systems. Hubble found them. But with this dark energy thing, what happened was that these astronomers were trying to quantify the expansion rate of the universe. So the Big Bang Theory with big explosion, universe is expanding. And so the assumption was that as things expand, they kind of slow down, right? If you take a baseball or a football and you throw it, it's going to eventually slow down and hit the ground. But when they did their calculations, they got a negative number. And then they checked it and they got a negative number. And what had happened was that it was actually accelerating. So it's like you take a baseball and you throw it and it actually starts to speed up. And so that discovery, that's the discovery of dark energy, and they got the Nobel Prize for it, these three astronomers that came up with that. So I think that what I think is going to be most interesting with Webb is what is it going to find that we don't know what the heck is going. There's certain things we want to look for, but what else is this thing going to come up with? Maybe it's going to go back 13.8 billion years and find something else other than what we think is the Big Bang Theory explanation of things. So that's what I'm most looking forward to, because I think those discoveries are coming.
Wow. Yes, right over here.
So this regards to debris and the dangers of operating in space. So when you were doing your spacewalks, you may have had some concern about debris, orbiting debris in low Earth orbit. You're a little bit higher than perhaps the real cloud of mess. But any little speck of paint or screw or screwdriver that's flying around several thousand miles an hour out there can create a lot of damage. What were your thoughts about doing those spacewalks and the chances of having an accident with space debris?
You're scaring me right now. Very worried now. You're scaring. Okay, so yeah, we were worried about it, certainly, and particularly after we had the Columbia Space Shuttle accident, which was a debris strike on the spaceship that put a hole in the wing and they couldn't come home. And we had ways to try to repair that now, but it wasn't sure that, but now meaning for my second flight, but we got very concerned not only about a debris strike on ascent as you're going uphill, which is what happened at Columbia. But also, when you get to orbit, you can hit stuff too. And there's stuff everywhere. The Hubble itself, there in the high gain antenna, there's a hole in it. It's a big antenna, just about the size of a golf ball. So something went right through there. And as you're walking around, the wide field camera, for example, has a exposed radiator, which so it has this metal piece on the outside of the skin of the telescope. So that was removed during my second. But we could see there, right? We just looked like someone with a BB gun just shot it up. There's all these little dings, and you're looking right there, like your head is right here, like in the way of where that rock path was whenever it happened. So we knew it was certainly a possibility. We did do a couple things. Like one of the things we did is after we released the telescope, there's more debris at the higher orbit, which didn't necessarily make sense because we thought there'd be less stuff up there, but there's actually more stuff up there because it's at a higher energy and it hangs around longer. So it's more dangerous at the higher altitude at 350 miles versus the space station, say, at 250. So we did adjust our orbit. After we let the telescope was gone, we went into more of an elliptical orbit where we had our apogee, which was still 350, but we lowered our perigee. So that reduced some of the risk for about half the time that we were up there for those last few days. But other than that, like when you're spacewalking, which is your question, really doesn't pay to worry about it. And the suit, what you think of as, all right, the suit is meant for spacewalking in zero gravity in orbit. You're going 17,500 miles an hour. I don't like going fast, by the way, either. But it was in orbit, it's not too bad. But you're going really fast. So anything you're going to hit, as you mentioned, is going to be a problem. But the suit has 7 layers, including a layer of Kevlar, which is bulletproof material. We practiced if you did have a rapid depress, like you got hit by something and you were incapacitated even from it, we practiced rescuing each other. And that was the one thing that we really you couldn't waive that capability to go do a spacewalk. There's some tests that were harder and some tests that maybe weren't as hard. But if you were going out on a spacewalk with someone else, you had to demonstrate that you could save that person. You could take that big object of a person inside of a spacesuit and safely get him inside in about 30 minutes. So the rule of thumb was that if you did take a leak, your secondary oxygen, if you did take a hit and it went to a leak, secondary oxygen pack would come on, and you would feed that leak and be alive for about 30 minutes. And so that was the time we needed to come back in that sort of emergency. So I think we practiced all that stuff, and we knew that was a possibility. We would inspect our suits, sunrise and sunset, for little nicks or anything that we might have picked up, because you can't really see very well in the dark. So when we ran into a sunrise, we would check and make sure everything was looking good. And before you go into darkness, you'd want to check, so then you knew when you come around the sun again, when that happened to you. So we'd always check little things. So there were things we did to try to alleviate the consequences of something happening. But you could not really prevent anything. You could do if it was an object large enough that they could track on the ground, you would avoid it. You could do a maneuver to avoid it, but there was still a possibility you might still get hit. So we've been pretty lucky. We haven't had anyone hit with anything. But you can't be worried about that. You trust that things are going to work, and you do your job, because worrying about that's not going to do you any good. So be prepared if it happens, but not worry that it's going to happen.
Other questions? Yes, we have one. How about let's go in the back. In the back there.
Hi there. I'm curious if you are excited for anything in particular most about Artemis, and also if you have any reflections about, well, maybe a culture shift in NASA and the kind of new commercial era of space compared to previous, more international and government-focused eras of spaceflight.
There's 2 questions there.
I suppose pick whichever one you like most.
Well, I could go to both, but I'll forget both. So you have to remind me of the second one maybe. But because they're both, I think, good questions, of course, as all of them are here. But the Artemis, am I excited? Yeah. So those 4 astronauts that were assigned to Artemis, it's Artemis 2, but they're the first crew going. So I know all of them. And when they landed at JFK, they were coming into, like the day after they got assigned, they came to do some publicity. that Neil Armstrong might not agree with. But they were coming in to do something. They wanted Colbert, and Neil Armstrong would be okay with that. That's part of the job. They were coming in to see Colbert, to be on the Colbert Show, and I think the Today Show. So they landed at JFK the day of the Colbert taping, and my friend Victor Glover texts me and goes, "Hey, are you around? You get together later." I'm like, "Yeah, let's go." So I ended up having dinner with all of them. My wife and I did, and it was great. We went to the Smith over by Lincoln Center there, and but I was so fortunate to be with them that day because they were so happy, right? It's a very special time when you get assigned to a flight. And I remember waiting for them. I got to the restaurant a little early, and they were walking from downtown, wherever they were staying, like 59th Street or something. So they're walking down the street, and I saw them, and I was just so happy to see them. And I crossed the street and gave Reed Wiseman, who's the commander, such a big hug. And I said, "Man, I can't believe how excited I am for you. I am more excited for you, with you guys getting assigned, than when I got assigned to my first space flight." And it was being truthful. I think the reason is because we've been waiting for so long. I mean, if you look, my class patch as an astronaut we had things we thought we were going to do. It had the space shuttle and the space station, but also had the moon and Mars. We haven't gotten there, right? And so now we have a crew that at least is going to orbit. And I said, I'm so excited for you guys. And he goes, "I understand." He goes, "Because I'm going to be even more excited for the next crew that gets to land and walk on it." So I am so happy for the four of them. They're a great group, and I'm just ecstatic. And I hope it all goes well. I hope they get off the ground relatively near term, and they then continue to do the rest of it. Land and settle and explore on the moon long term. The other thing you had was a culture shift at NASA. The private stuff, yeah. So NASA, I think, over the years just got a bit risk averse, and it's government, it's taxpayers' dollars they're playing with, and so it's very interesting. At the end of Apollo, 3 missions were canceled, even though the hardware was already built, and I think they had trouble even getting up to Apollo 17 launched. So it was a change in the mindset. It wasn't a national priority any longer. And you're playing with taxpayers' dollars, and there's only so much you're going to be able to do with that. And NASA all along, I think, wanted to turn things over as much as they could to private enterprise, which I think is a good government agency should do that. Just like the aircraft were developed by the government, military purposes, and now we have this thriving commercial airline industry, right? So they tried to do that with the shuttle. I only found this out a couple of years ago, speaking to Charlie Bolden, who was a shuttle pilot back in those days, went the early days of the shuttle before the first accident, where they were converting the manuals to be used by NASA astronauts to be used by commercial airline pilots, with the hope that the shuttle would be flown so routinely that commercial airline pilots could learn to fly this thing, and people could go for trips. You could transport people around the globe. And after the first accident, that was the end of that idea. That didn't happen, right? But they looked for an opportunity at the end of the shuttle program to do that. So I think it's a good thing for NASA. I think it's offloaded a lot of what they were trying to do with the taxpayers' dollars. They paid for a lot of it, right, with the development with SpaceX and the commercial crew program that they paid for, but also was a lot of private investment there, and now they're able to do some really exciting things with it. Not just the tourists, but people going there to do real science and real research that aren't career astronauts. My students have flown a couple experiments. They haven't gone themselves, but they've gotten a chance to fly a few experiments to space, which would have been unheard of. So I think it's really opening up the possibilities. And now that it's possible, people are thinking about what they might be able to do, or how could they increase the availability to it. So it seems to be a big growth area for the economy as well. So I think it's all good. I really do, and I agree with you. NASA, it had a bit of a culture shift, or reality, or times changed since the Apollo program, and they had to adjust and do what they could with it. But I think there's a chance for great things from both NASA and the private sector.
Right here.
Hey, Mike. So over the last couple decades, so from Mercury all the way to now Artemis, you were talking about the right stuff. So going from test pilots, military backgrounds, to yourself in the shuttle program being a civilian, what do you see Artemis, the candidates that are going through that program now and future programs, like the qualities that make up the right stuff? And then after your 4 tries, what do you think NASA saw in you that was the right stuff that got you selected?
Well, I think so. Your first question was what are they going to be looking for in the future? Oh, sir. Yeah. So the right stuff. The book and the movie was mainly about test pilots. Being able to do these really extraordinary, exciting, dangerous things and having fun while they were doing it. Whatever that's kind of the way they defined it. And I think what it really is, though, is having a passion and a shared vision and teamwork and working together and taking care of each other. And it's not just the astronaut teams, but it's also all the support teams. And as I said, that's what I miss the most at NASA. And what I'm hoping will happen with the book is show that these things that I learned in perseverance and teamwork and leadership in space were necessary to be able to maybe have the right stuff to do the jobs, but they also pertain to everything we do on Earth in our professional life, but also in our personal life. Some of these guidelines that I've learned, like if you find someone on your team you don't like, don't think of it you don't like them, think of it you don't know them well enough, and find something that you can care for and admire with everyone on your team and put that in a bank of good thoughts to have. And that works really well with family, by the way. If you can pull that one off, and especially around the holiday season, like, you might have a sibling that kind of irritates you. My goddaughter's right here shaking her head like, yes, Mike, we know about you. But, you might have some, but, I think it's important to always have that good thought, and that was something I learned from Alan Bean, the fourth person on the moon. So, but that's like, caring about each other, finding a way to get along, sharing that passion, serving something that's bigger than yourself. I think that's what I think we have in common, I would say. And I think work ethic as well. It was a job, it was like people might think of the glamorous part of it or whatever we might envision going to space might be. It was a job. So most of my time was spent on the ground. 18 years at NASA, 26 days in space. Even my friend Peggy Whitson, it was 675 days in space. That was 22 years at NASA. And so most of your time is going to be on the ground, working, doing stuff that isn't collecting a lot of attention. But you're working on things that I miss those days on the ground as much as I miss in space. And so after you get selected, when I was part of the astronaut office, then you start reviewing applications. And so maybe to answer your other questions, what you're looking for, there are some amazing applications that come in there. There are people who are, might be a Rhodes Scholar and they've invented all these things and they played the flute at the White House for Christmas, and that, like, who is this person, And, but I didn't see any interest in the space program. I didn't see any indication. It seemed like it's another thing to check off. And I always was a little wary of that, that what is the motivation? Because it really was a job. And so that's what we were looking for. People that were passionate about the space program, that were qualified to do the job. Ego is a problem, generally. You need to be part of a team, so a super ego is not going to fit in. We're not going to look for people like that, so people that can be truly a team player, people you could trust with your lives, with your life, with your family's life, thinking of it that way, like you're picking a really close friend that you're going to want to fly with. And that makes it a little more difficult to find people like that, because a lot of people are qualified, but it's those other things, the passion, the work ethic, the teamwork, that I think it will always be most important for the NASA job, because it's not just flying in space. That's only a little bit of it. It's supporting all your friends and figuring out problems when other people are in space to help them out and having those qualities. I don't see that changing anytime soon.
Couldn't hurt if the applicant roots for the Mets also.
Yeah, if you're a Mets fan, that's good.
There you go.
But not required. Yeah.
Let's take one or two more. Yes, right over here, sir. Well, hold on, please wait for the microphone.
Do you have any thoughts about the virtually unregulated profusion of satellites being put up into space?
Like there's too many of them?
Well, no, for example, like SpaceX is putting up dozens of satellites at a time. Yeah. At some point, those satellites are going to turn into junk floating around the space. And you talked about a very spiritual kind of experience being up there. If you look ahead 4 or 5, 10 years from now, our skies are going to be full of junk. And have you got any thoughts about that?
Well, I think the deal that they would have when you put something in space, you're committed to being a good steward for it. And for example, with the Hubble Space Telescope, which is a pretty big piece of equipment, it's the size of a school bus, of a large school bus, let's say. One of the last things we did, actually, we did it on the last mission, but the first thing we did on that final mission, in case we got cut short for some reason and had to come home early, is we put a docking ring on the bottom of it, so that when it's at the end of its life and it's ready to re-enter the atmosphere, we can fly a rocket up to it to guide it back in. So it has a docking ring on it. So the idea is that when you put something in space, you're supposed to be the steward of it and have a plan for it to re-enter or come back. How true that is, I'm not really sure, but I would imagine that should be in place for anybody that launches anything that is a good citizen doing that. Anyway, maybe we can talk about that afterwards more if someone knows more about that. But no, it's an important thing because there's more, as you say, there's more and more things, and if you launch things, you're going to need to have a plan of what to do with it in the long term when it's not useful anymore.
Let's take one more. Sorry, I know you have. We'll take two more. Yes, we'll get right there. Those two, 1, 2.
Thank you for that. I guess one question is, or my only question would pertain to how you've seen the American public's view of space flight, space exploration, and even indeed your own status as an astronaut vis-a-vis the general public. How has that changed over the past 6 decades? And is there some sort of explanation for that?
Well, when I got to see Neil Armstrong on the moon in the Apollo program. I don't know if you're comparing it to that, like what we have now, to that, or just how it's changed since then. It was a huge national event when that happened, but it was more than that. And the Apollo guys, I've gotten to meet most of them, and all of them will say when they went on their post-flight tour around the world, it was never you did it, the Americans did it. It was always we did it. They might be in India or Japan or wherever they were, and it was a world accomplishment, and that's the way it was perceived, which is really unique. And they didn't expect that. But even our foes, we were competing with the Soviet Union. It was front page news. They were all listening everywhere around the world because it was more than the United States. It was people doing something like this for the first time, leaving the planet and setting foot somewhere else. And it was the American taxpayer that I guess predominantly paid for it. It was an international effort. A lot of people from other places contributed, but the whole world felt like that was a world event, and it was somewhat of a unifying event. Going into it, it necessarily wasn't. There was a lot of complaints. Why are we doing this? There was a better use of money, and that carried over till after when the money kind of went away. But that moment itself of accomplishing that landing was something that the whole world watched and appreciated. And we were very lucky. I was 6 years old, but I think I was very lucky to be alive at that time to witness that, because I don't think we're going to have anything like that maybe ever again. And that's okay, because that's how amazing that was. And so I think I maybe jumped to the conclusion of what you were thinking. Sometimes people compare to what it was. Oh, we were so excited and doing all those things. But that, that's in the past, and I think we should treasure that, but not like have any sour grapes that it's not. We don't think the excitement level is that high anymore, because I actually think it is. Because, for example, where I teach at Columbia, this is I started there about 10 years ago, about 8 years ago. In fact, it was 8 years ago. We had an event for the movie The Martian up on campus, and I was on this panel with some others related to the movie, and 3 students came up to me and wanted to start a space club, right? And is Peter Richards here? He's right over there. Peter's here. You weren't one of the original guys. He's one of my students who was a CSI. I saw you. Sorry, Peter. Anyway, but Peter was part of that club. That club started with 3 students, and then you were in it. You graduated how many years ago, Peter?
5.
About 5 years ago. And how big was the club then? 120. We're over 400 now in that club. But there's 280 active members that show up to meetings every week. And they've flown a couple experiments in space. They do outreach. They do high altitude balloons. They compete in rocket competition, the America's Cup rocket competition. So I see the enthusiasm as growing because now it's a little bit different, because even though we were all excited about it, when I was a little kid, I was like, there's no way I could ever be a part of this. I didn't even think, never mind walking on the moon or being an astronaut, but even being a part of NASA. How do I do that? But you can do that now, because it's not just the government. It's not just a select group of people doing it. It's a lot of commercial companies. It's entrepreneurs that are doing it. So I think in that sense, more people are participating or have the opportunity to participate. And for that reason, I think that the interest has grown. I don't think we're ever going to have that moment of, I don't know. I don't even know. I think people going to Mars. I think that'll happen, and people will say, I thought we already did that. Didn't Matt Damon go there? You know, but I think, you know, I don't know what's going to be interesting. I'll see what it is going back to the moon. I think people will be excited, but I don't think we'll ever recapture that. But I think in some way this might be better because there's more ways for people to participate.
Did you watch the guy on Mars? Hey, the Knicks are on. Yeah, the Knicks are on. We had one more in the back. Yeah.
Hi. My question is about the new space race. When people are talking about, like, so you've been to moon and you've seen the space.
I have not been to the moon.
Okay, so sorry about that.
Just to be clear, I've not.
But like, is it about colonization? Is it about extracting the material? What is it about, like, really, and who is leading it in your view right now?
I don't think colonization is a good word to use, but I think it's more about like settling places and exploring places. But I think it's going to be a bit of everything. I think, for example, I think the role of the government will be more into exploration. I don't think it's going to be the U.S. or any one country doing it alone. And the International Space Station was United States, Canada, Japan, the countries of Europe, and Russia was a huge partner and still is with us. So hopefully, I don't know, whatever things are going on that might prevent us from in the future collaborating, but hopefully things will be available that we can work with many partners, and I think the U.S. will definitely be a part of it. India landed a spacecraft on the moon. It was very exciting for them. Not many countries have done that, but they've also accomplished it. So I think to do something like that, like settling on the moon, I think it's going to be a lot of countries participating in it. But I also think it's going to be commercial companies. I think SpaceX has got the big Starship that they launch now every once in a while, and it blows up at some point, but that's part of the plan apparently, right? They're learning. NASA really can't blow anything up. That would be a problem, I think, for them. They don't have that model of the way that they develop things, but SpaceX does. I think it's fail fast but learn faster or something like this. So I think it's going to be a combination of the countries of the world, because lots of them are interested and some of them have not been able to participate. I think the door's been opening for a lot more countries to participate now as it gets opened up. So I think the countries of the world that want to cooperate, I think will be able to. I think companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin and some of the others will be there as well. And I think the motives will be different for each. I think it'll be maybe the traditional exploration for science, maybe similar to what they have maybe at the South Pole, where it's international and they're doing exploring down there. Different countries are. But I think it'll also be for private enterprise as well. Maybe it'll be tourism, visiting. People want to just visit for the experience of visiting, and then people also want to be there, hopefully, for economic benefits. Maybe it'll be mining an asteroid. That's a whole complete different model, maybe. So I think if we can access it, and now we can access it more than we've been able to ever, and hopefully that capability will continue. So I think it's going to be a mix. People who want to do more creative things, like make a movie or whatever else comes to mind. When you couldn't do it, people didn't really waste time about, why do I want to waste my time about what I can do in space for developing new pharmaceuticals or materials or whatever it might be, because I can't get there. But now that you can, more than you could before, and in the future I think it'll be even more so, I think that there's going to be a lot of really interesting ideas, which includes going and settling and setting up some sort of base of operations on the moon. Then eventually Mars, I think, as well. But I think the moon is a really good goal for us to explore next.
I've always admired your perspective on when and you referred to it earlier about, no, this is the beautiful place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
And the notion of, Aaron told me once, like, you're on your front lawn and you're like, I was up there earlier today. It's like, Long Island knows from commutes, okay? But that's like one of the great commutes. Yeah. And I guess my question is, were you ready? You know, there's a notion in sports of after the cheering stops for an athlete. Yeah. You know, how does an athlete deal with that? Can an athlete prepare for that? Did you know when it was time for you, okay, that was beautiful, it was great, the camaraderie, spectacular, it's time for me to move on?
Yeah, so that happened. I talk about that, and I think that's the last chapter, knowing when to pivot, right? Change is coming. Change came for the space program. It was the end of the shuttle program, toward the end of the shuttle program for my second flight. But, you know, that was where I was winding down, and NASA was moving on to a new model of the commercial crew program, working with SpaceX and Boeing to develop spaceships and using a lot more automation, which I think is a great thing. The only way to get to space was going to be flying on a Russian Soyuz for a while. It was like that for about 9 years until we started flying with the SpaceX Dragon just a few years ago. And it was going to be long duration flights. We weren't going to Hubble anymore. It was going to be 6-month stays on the space station. And I think when I was a new astronaut, I would have been 100% cool with all that stuff. But a couple things happened to me. One of them was on my second flight. We had a couple extra days. We had bonus days because the weather was bad in Florida, which was great because we couldn't land. So I remember I got to the point, I was one of the first guys to get suited out of the 7 of us. And as soon as I got my harness on, which for the parachute to get in my seat, they waved us off. The weather was bad, so I had to take my spacesuit off twice. But that was okay because we had nothing on. We were supposed to come home. We had nothing on the flight plan. We had to bring up the galley and turn on the toilet again. But other than that, nothing. We didn't even unstow the antenna, the KU band antenna. We didn't, no email, nothing. We were on our own just to enjoy ourselves. And it was during one of those days, looking out the window, listening to music, that a strange thing came over me that I never felt before. It was satisfaction. For some reason, I felt satisfied with where I was in my astronaut career, anyway. And I started thinking about other things. And it's like, this is extraordinary, and I wanted to share it more. And then, you know, we mentioned the first tweet, but also doing more things out. The IMAX, they made an IMAX movie, and there's a couple documentaries on our flight, and I started doing some other appearances and telling the story, and really enjoyed that. And when I was offered another flight, and I had to make the decision right away. It was to replace a guy that had a medical issue that came up. And Peggy Whitson, who was my astronaut classmate, but now at that time the boss of the astronaut office, she wanted to replace him with me, right? And it was going to be a 6-month stay on the station, and it was a Soyuz launch. You know, they looked at the training plan. It was going to be 3 years of training, most of which was going to be outside of the country, and really busy, which was fine and great. But my kids were both like right on the edge of high school, and I was like, do I really want to miss all that? I mean, this was a great opportunity, and I was like, Peg, I just don't feel like I don't have that fire. I didn't have the desire anymore, and I turned it down. Now, I don't know if she never asked me what I would have felt. I probably just would have gone around, things are fine. But once I turned down that flight, I walked out of her office, and it was like there was a before and after in that moment. I was like, what am I telling myself, you know? And it wasn't necessarily like I was really sad or upset. It was just like, whoa, you know, I never thought this day would come, and it came. And so at that point, I was like, I might start thinking about what should be coming next. And so what's cool about, for me, writing the book and talking about this is I get to relive this stuff with all of you. So I really appreciate your listening. But that was to me, I think, the first indication. And it was really what it was is I just didn't have that strong burning desire anymore. And I was ready for something else. And I never thought that day was going to, when I walked in that door at NASA, I never in a million years thought I ever would want to leave. And it was a very difficult choice, but I kind of felt like if I don't go and follow these other things that I'm interested in doing, which I still think I'm part of the space program. I mean, we've talked about space stuff the whole time here, right? that is what I'm most interested in. So I feel like I'm still part of it. I'm just doing it in a different capacity. Very grateful for the opportunities I had, but also grateful for the way it worked out. But it was not an easy decision, man. Walking out of there, leaving that behind was not easy. But it's turned out okay. And now I get to hang out with a lot of former astronauts because they don't want to hang out with you when you're an active astronaut because they're jealous. You still get to fly in space. So I've gotten to know a lot of the former guys and learned so much, and all that stuff's in the book.
Well, you should not be surprised that there are, along with these wonderful stories tonight, there are more wonderful stories in the book. And a slight selfish plug here, I have a podcast called Before the Cheering Started, and Mike and I had a conversation from a couple of months ago that will drop this Wednesday, more about growing up on Long Island and Columbia and the path, the journey to success. But again, the book is a terrific read. We appreciate you being here tonight, Mike. And we appreciate all you.
Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
And thank you, Bud. Thank you very much. Can't thank you enough. Oh, thanks. Yeah.